The kids aren't all right. Apparently, if you ask senior executives at major companies, the youngest generations are lazy, entitled, and have inflated senses of worth. They need to learn humility or else. Today, we're looking at Generation Z, the group of people who were born in the late 1990s to the early 2000s and are making their way into the job market now. We're discussing their strengths, their challenges, and I'm going to try to get to the bottom of the question of whether or not they're as big a problem as some parts of the corporate world are making them out to be. I'm Mike. I've got a background of 25 years in pharma tech and consulting. I've held C-level roles in global organizations, and I have degrees in business, human resources, and psychology. I know the ins and outs of the corporate world, and on this channel, I analyze why companies do the things they do. And I provide advice on navigating the corporate world. No fluff, just straight talk. And today is about Gen Z and the challenges. Let's get stuck in. We have to start with a pet peeve of mine. And this is something that happens whenever media talks about these generations. You see, when talking about generations, we usually get a defined archetype. So Gen Z have these 5 or 10 characteristics, and Gen Y have these 10 characteristics. And then you get told how these two generations differ. There are two problems with this. Generational archetypes are inherently flawed, because when you talk about any generation and their characteristics, what you are actually talking about is a statistical curve of a prevalence of certain types of behaviors, habits, and values. When media talks about the archetypes, they inevitably either end up talking about the statistically average Gen Z, so the person at the middle of the curve, or they talk about the extreme archetype, the one that's at the very end of the curve. Very few Gen Zs are going to be statistically average or extreme because it's a mix of multiple behaviors, multiple habits, and multiple values. So at an average or aggregate level, a Gen Z is tech savvy, is going to prioritize work-life balance, seek frequent recognition, values diversity, and seeks variety and meaning over stability. But at an individual level, you'll find Gen Z individuals that are not tech savvy, but do prioritize work-life balance, while other individuals will be highly tech savvy and are fully committed to their careers. The aggregate doesn't say anything meaningful about the individual in front of you. Second, the archetypes are almost always positioned as oppositional to other archetypes of other generations. Media focuses on the differences and the conflicts, not the similarities. And again, it makes the assumption that there are no boomers and no millennials out there that are tech savvy or prioritize work-life balance. And that's just not true. What we do is we say there are these archetypes and look how different they are from these other archetypes. The reality is that how you should be thinking about it is it's different curves that overlap, but that there's a drift between generations on that curve. When you look at it that way, the whole concept of these oppositional archetypes that emphasize the differences between generations falls a little bit apart. The fact is, we're not that different overall. Society and culture changes at a very slow pace, and the drift is not as monumental as how some media likes to portray it. Now, I'm going to make those mistakes myself because it's an easy way to talk about things. So having said that, what characterizes the statistically average archetypal Gen Z? Well, they're tech savvy. Why? Because they grew up in a fully digital world. Digital is what they're good at. They can't debug anything though, because none of them ever worked with DOS or Linux or buggy games that needed custom batch files to run. Give them an app and they'll adopt it incredibly quickly. Whether you're a boomer or a Gen Z, hopefully you're enjoying this content. If so, and you're new here, click the subscribe button. It means a ton for the channel. Really appreciate it. Thank you. They seek frequent recognition. Again, why? Because apps give likes. You can binge television. You don't have to wait for the next episode. You can book anything online. They've grown up with next day delivery. All of this has instilled a mindset of immediacy. They value diversity because they've grown up in a global world. They've gone to school with people from all walks of life, and they've been told that no matter who you are, you have the right to be heard. So they apply that logic to the world around them. They seek variety and meaning over stability. This comes down to those apps again, but also the plethora of choices. The options in terms of entertainment, food, activities that are available to people today are so much greater than they were 20 years ago. The whole point is not to keep coming back to that one good restaurant in town, but to try every new restaurant there is. Newness, freshness, variety is built into society today. They job hop and have a lower attention span. Because just like those shows are binged and forgotten, just like hype clothing gets forgotten, they too lose interest. The variety, the newness that they seek also fills them with impatience. A relative lack of social skills. Gen Zs seem to have worse social skills. More of them feel lonely and many don't know how to make friends. Why? Again, it's likely the apps. the phones, the things they are glued to instead of making physical connections with others. They don't even need to talk to someone to get a date. It can all be done through an app. And then, for 3 years, they were stuck at home because of COVID, and reintegrating into a wider world after that has been hard, and it's led to an increase in loneliness, mental health issues, and a whole list of other problems. So why are they seen as lazy? Think of the stereotypical corporation. What do they want? Well, if you're really cynical, they want to work you to the bone and commit your day, your nights, and everything in between to your work. Contrast that to one of the priorities of a Gen Z, work-life balance. There's going to be a built-in inherent conflict to that. If your idea at the outer extreme is that work and life are entirely separate and the two should never mix, and you have an idea of precisely how many hours your work should make up of your day and not a minute more, well, then there's going to be a clash of expectations. Next one, frequent recognition. These are young people that grew up with Instagram and TikTok and instant likes and instant feedback. That's one part. Most organizations and most managers don't work that way. Most companies still have an annual performance appraisal and feedback process. It's once a year, maybe twice in some companies, but for a person that's used to instant gratification and likes, that's not going to be enough. Even in companies with rapid feedback systems, it often doesn't happen that often. Also because in a busy day, most managers work on the logic of no news is good news. They don't say anything as long as work is getting done, and they're not explicitly showering praise or feedback on individuals on a daily basis. It just doesn't happen that often in the physical world. Secondly, in the Instagram world, you can block people that give you negative feedback. You can avoid unpleasantness if you want to, and a lot of feedback is frequent, but very superficial, and in general, it's structured to be validating and positive. At a job, we've already established that it's not particularly frequent, but it's also not always validating or positive. Feedback in a work setting is typically shaped around some sort of developmental framework. It's around what you need to do better. And this is 3 challenges. Workplace feedback is just not frequent, not validating by default, and it can't be avoided, and it has real-life consequences, and that doesn't mesh with the expectations of this stereotypical Gen Z archetype. So what do the Gen Zs do? Well, they quit, which is the real-world version of blocking the person that wrote a mean comment on their Instagram. They feel frustration that the feedback doesn't give them the dopamine hit that years of online activity have taught them to crave, and they start to shy away from work and feedback. They also seek variety over stability. And if you're working in procurement and your job is to buy cement for a construction company, that's what you do. That's what the company expects you to do, and they would prefer you to do it all the time and forever and not be difficult about it. Companies do talk about constant growth and adaptation and learning new things, and it's true, they want you to adopt whatever new tool they're implementing. They want you to get proficient at AI so you can become more efficient and save the company some money. But at the heart of it, they still want you to keep buying cement for a construction company. Most jobs are repetitive. It's not just the ones down at the production line. If you're a financial controller, everything is structured around an annual budgeting process and a monthly controlling and close process. January is more or less the same as February, and February is more or less the same as March. You might code something new, but you're coding every day. Seeking variety is the opposite of all of this.
If you wanted a raise or a promotion, the way you got it was you worked really, really hard, you accomplished something, you go to your boss and be like, look what I did, I deserve a raise or a bonus. And that was how things were done. And kids now will come to me and be like, pay me more and you'll see what I can do. And I'm like, no.
But for the vast majority of roles in a vast majority of companies, these roles are built for stability and continuity, and that doesn't mesh with the expectations of these individuals. So you have younger staff asking for development opportunities and growth opportunities in an organization where growth is a slow process that takes significant time investments with much longer horizons than those employees envision. The company thinks it takes 5 or 6 years to get good at something, and the Gen Zs feel 1 to 2 years is an eternity. And on top of that, promotion cycles, to the extent that they exist, are at best annual processes, and time at level, again, emphasizes time and investment and not short-term variety. As for lack of social skills, the research on this is fairly clear. Younger generations feel more lonely and they have a harder time establishing connections with other people. It's the Tinder effect. You don't need to actually talk to someone to get a date. Put together a profile with some nice pictures, you swipe right, and then you spend hours obsessing over a cool starting line.
It's called the Gen Z stare. Some say it's a new social phenomenon where people born between 1997 and 2012 have basically zero reaction when spoken to in various social scenarios.
The hard and uncomfortable exercise of dealing with people in the real world, building relationships, and understanding that relationships are, at work, much more important than how good you are at something, that must be positively terrifying. All of this contributes to those mental health issues. Imagine for a moment that you've been raised in a digital world with instant gratification, with positive feedback, with the ability to block negative feedback. A world where the moment you're bored, you can move on to something else and you never have to deal with people you don't like. And all of this, it's no fault of theirs. This world has been thrust onto the Gen Zs. Imagine being shaped by that world and then walking into a working environment that does hold your hand, doesn't allow you to just try something new when you're bored, which has high expectations of you and doesn't only shower you with praise. There's going to be a clash. If you're the company, you see an entitled, distracted, immature employee. And if you're the employee, you see a cold, cynical, brutal system that doesn't care about you and sees you as an insignificant cog in a bigger machine. And this leads to job hopping and burnout and depression and an exacerbation of those mental health issues that we're seeing in these coming generations. What we have here is essentially a failure to communicate, a failure to adapt. Companies are not in tune with the needs of the employees, and employees are very much not ready for the reality of the work world. And that's why we see stories about quiet quitting and job hopping and all sorts of other coping mechanisms or methods of subversion, depending on whose side you're on. But for me, the reality is that there's a bigger responsibility on the companies. When these generations walk through the door, you can do two things. You can complain that they're difficult for whatever reason, that'll get you nowhere, or you can adapt. You can change some parts of the way you run your business to adapt to these employees' needs, and you can invest in helping them to adjust to the working world. And I do believe you have to do both. It's naive to think that some company of 150,000 people is just magically going to become super feedback orientated and offer new opportunities left, right, and center every 5 minutes. Companies are not like that. Society isn't like that. Change is slow, and stability and continuity is something you look for in a good company. But there are things that companies can and should change. Expectations to managers, training of managers too, in terms of how to give feedback. They can look at those annualized processes and see how you can adjust them to a demographic that needs and responds positively to more regular feedback. And they can set clearer expectations and train the new staff, socialize them to the reality of the real world. The fact is that Gen Zs aren't bad staff. They're not lazy or entitled or whatever you want to call them. They're a product of what they were exposed to and how they were raised. And they are creative, they're fast learners, and they are much more change ready than any generation that went before them. But they're also a little bit unsure of themselves. And I don't think it's too much to ask that companies adapt a little as well. And anyways, Jeff Immelt, former CEO of GE, said many years back that he felt that younger generations couldn't think strategically. He felt they were too short-sighted and not capable of thinking in the longer term. By now, some of those people he was talking about are CEOs of companies today. And before Jeff Immelt, there was Aristotle. Aristotle was one of those Greek men who wore togas and is attributed to have said something about the younger generations as well. Young people have exalted notions because they have not yet been humbled by life or learned its necessary limitations. Moreover, their hopeful disposition makes them think themselves equal to great things. Aristotle isn't necessarily wrong. Young generations always have a lot to learn, and we usually use it as a cudgel to expose and highlight their inadequacies compared to ourselves. Or at least, that's how we see it. But the thing that really gets me is how banal Aristotle's quote is. A couple of thousand years ago, some old fart was saying kids nowadays are just soft. And here, a couple of thousand years later, we're still saying the same thing. The kids aren't soft. We're just old, and life is a constant journey of development. So I look forward to the day when those Gen Zs look down on whatever generation will be after them and hear them shout how those Gen Qs are just so soft compared to us. Nothing changes. Everything stays the same. Remember to subscribe. See you soon.